All right, I believe we are live on Facebook. So thank you everyone for tuning in. My name is Ashlyn. I'm with Grand Strand Action Together, and I am here tonight to talk to Pastor Thomas Dixon and Professor Stephanie Southworth about critical race theory. The reason why this, kind of got thrown together at the last minute, it's being talked about a lot all over the country, especially here in South Carolina, with people like Henry McMaster and our local school board chairman, Ken Richardson in Horry County, discussing it and saying that, it's never going to be taught in the South Carolina schools. You may have read in one of the local papers, and maybe it was one of the news stations, did an interview with Ken, and he said that Horry County schools will never teach anything that is divisive, like critical race theory. He disagrees with it. And then the very next question, he revealed that he actually has no idea what it is. He doesn't know what it is. He never looked into it. He never looked it up. So I think it's time we talk about what it is and what it isn't. And this is the first of a few discussions that we're going to have on this. And I just want to turn the floor over for our two guests to introduce themselves. And we'll go ahead and start with Stephanie.
My name is Stephanie Southworth, and I'm a senior lecturer of sociology at Coastal Carolina University. I study race, ethnicity, education, poverty, and homelessness. And I also teach courses on all of the above, or all of those things.
And Pastor Dixon, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, hello, everyone. Let me try to stop this thing right quick. Yeah. I'm Pastor Thomas Dixon, a community advocate, and I've been basically addressing white supremacy and racism in the various aspects of life in America over the years. And so I'm really happy to be involved in this forum tonight.
Thank you very much. So we're glad to have both of you with us. And really, I just want to start out with, what do you think about the remarks made by some of the politicians here who seem to not have any sort of concept of what critical race theory is, to act like, it's being taught to, school children in grade school when they don't even understand the concept. And it's clearly not something that is being taught to grade school children when it's like a higher level law school theory. So are they saying, they just don't want us to talk about race in school at all? Or what's the deal?
Stephanie?
So I think as civil servants, politicians, anybody that is in the face of their organization or the government, they are responsible to know what they're talking about, at least to inform themselves, even if they don't know exactly what they're talking about to start off. So when a reporter asks the governor or asks the school board member, what do you think of this? 99.9% of the time, those people know that question is going to be asked. So I think it is very dismissive, and it's very it's not very appropriate to not know what they're talking about when they make those kinds of statements. It not informing themselves means to me that they just don't care.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great answer, because I believe that failure to give an answer is just another aspect of white supremacy and white privilege. For so long, they've just made statements and thrown out things and expected it to be accepted, and those things were accepted. So now, as we challenge them on this issue of critical race theory, now they get caught because they don't understand. It's like, what am I supposed to say now? What I say now? They're challenging me. But that's just another indication of the racism that we're trying to overcome. And it's really sad that they can still feel that they can fall back to that default setting, the default setting of, I don't know, but you just believe what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But that's not going to happen anymore.
Right. I want to just touch on what this might mean for Black teachers and other teachers of color who may try and, bring in different things into their teaching that, are anti-racist. Clearly, we know that apparently these folks think that anything we talk about that has to do with race and, holding the country accountable for its wrongs is apparently, critical race theory instead of just, admitting our history and learning from it. I feel like this is going to put a little bit of a target on these teachers, especially with parents now riled up about this. I feel like 2 years ago, I don't think your average, Horry County school parent would have any idea what this is. So what would you think about that?
I teach courses in race and ethnicity, and the first thing I say is that we can't know where we are. We can't understand where we are without knowing where we came from. Every policy, every law, every attitude from the past affects where we are today. Little kids aren't learning about that, but in high school and in college, they should be learning about that. How our decisions or how the decisions of our politicians affect the way we live today. I mean, legacy of redlining and school and housing segregation affects where people live, the money their schools get. If you ignore all that and the kids don't learn about that and don't know, then it's real easy to say, oh, well, they go to that poor school because they don't care. Mm-hmm. When that's not the reason, right? They're there because that school's not getting funding because they've been shoved into these neighborhoods a lot of the time. For elementary school kids, the teachers don't teach this because they shouldn't. And for high school kids, I don't think they're teaching much of it as it is, much less like the kids that come into my classes are shocked at much of what they're learning. And to me, it's just history. I wouldn't have to teach so much history if students were getting that in high school.
Yeah. Pastor Dixon.
Yeah, the reality of our school system is that they've laid down the foundation of creating that level of ignorance in people of color by failing to teach the African-American side of history at all. They've just taken it, it's been whitewashed. Right now, I believe like approximately 10% of the educational process is dedicated to the Black part of American history, 10%, and 80% to white. Although we know in truth and in honesty, they should know the truth and the truth shall set them free, that Black people's contribution to the United States historically is much greater than 10%. As a matter of fact, Black folk built this place, and as long as the historical content that Black people contributed to this nation can be kept out of the educational process, white America, white supremacy America, can continue to condition Black minds to have low self-esteem, to have the lowest paying jobs, to not make it even to college, because they've been taught a lie from early education when it talks about pledging allegiance to this red, white, and blue flag. The last 6 words say that with liberty and justice for all, and little Black children, they will say that all day and get older though. And else I was taught a lie where little white children know as they get older, they will understand liberty and justice for all. That disparity right there, that parity in children raised from a young age already begins to break this whole the whole unity factor that everybody likes to talk about in America. And those same people who don't want to teach critical race theory, which I think that term needs to be defined better for people, especially those that want to fight against it, the same as defunding the police. I think that needs to be defined better for those who don't want to accept it. But in putting this out, they should be able to understand this is going to strengthen us as a whole.
Mhm.
As long as you keep creating bias in one set of Americans based on ethnicity and low self-esteem and another based on ethnicity, you cannot get equality or equity out of that. It's impossible. And so when they talk about this teaching critical race theory is bringing about division, well, when you start at division, you can't get to division.
Mhm.
We're already there.
Let's look at what the definition says for critical race theory. Because Ken Richardson, if you're listening, I think this is a little over your head. I don't think this is what you're talking about. It says critical race theory is an academic movement of civil rights scholars and activists in the United States who seek to critically examine the law as it intersects with issues of race, and then challenge mainstream liberal approaches to racial justice. So yeah, that doesn't sound like anything that our elementary school kids or even our high school kids are being taught. What it seems to me is that the reactionary right wants to just shut everyone up about racial issues in general. I don't know who got this, who found this term on that side and decided that this is our new, hot topic. But I feel like it has a lot of potential problems for school kids and for the teachers who want to talk about the truth in the country. I feel like they, will try to say that definition that I just read off is, that's just like academic speak, but, our Marxist teachers are, teaching, indoctrinating these young children, when it really seems to be the other way around. By not teaching them the history, it seems like they're trying to keep them from learning and to indoctrinate them, for their side. So I'm not sure what do you think? Where do we go from here? What is something that we could maybe do to counteract this opinion of critical race theory and just talking about racial issues?
I love the way that those same, conservative right people will toss around terms when it comes to protecting their whiteness, like indoctrinating our kids. When the reality is, Black kids have been indoctrinated into a white history all of our lives. I never knew about the Tulsa race riots or any of the Greenwood or any of the others. I never knew about. I wasn't taught about Denmark Vesey in school or Frederick Douglass or I didn't. When I came up, I didn't even get Dr. King because he was alive then. So that was a whole nother, I'm gonna leave that right there. We're not gonna talk about that. But the reality is when we look at our educational process, you cannot have an educational process that does not educate, it doesn't teach the truth. And there's so many things in American history that have been omitted simply because, of course, the winner historically always has written the history and they write it in their own favor. And so white America has written this history in its own favor. It's made General George Armstrong Custer out to be a hero when really he was a mass murderer of our Native Americans. The portrayal of Native Americans in our society it's crazy the way that they've been depicted and misused. But that's the way of our American society. And until I just don't understand the fear of telling the truth. Why are they so afraid of telling the truth? Is this going to cut into that stronghold or stranglehold of white privilege? But ultimately, I will say this, they're not going to be able to stop this truth from coming forward. Just like right now, today, more people know some of the real history. We're nowhere near from all of the real history, but some of the real history, more and more that history will be revealed. And ultimately, I know I'm pushing for the books to be rewritten. It's time for history books to be rewritten. And those people that are afraid right now, the anti-critical race theory people, or people that are paranoid about it, they can be paranoid because it's their people who actually suppress this history from being taught truthfully and honestly so that anybody and everybody could hear it. I think we could break down barriers of racial prejudice and discrimination if we just let our children have the real truth and let them decide for themselves as they get older if they want to be racist, instead of giving it to them from a young age.
Mhm.
I as well grew up in Southern California, and when I moved to North Carolina and then South Carolina, I used to say, and this was before I was educated, but I would say there's no racism in California. I didn't see it. But I did go to a school where the white kids, and the Hispanic kids, we all went to school together, but we all took different classes. And I didn't see that as racist or institutional racism or anything like that. It wasn't until I took a class in inequality that I went, oh my gosh, this is a thing. Like, kids don't know unless they're told. And that's one of the reasons why, like, the first day of class, I tell students, like, how many of you think the Native Americans and Pilgrims were friends? And to their credit, more and more of them are raising their hand and saying, no, or not raising their hand and saying, no, they weren't friends. Like, I've seen a shift in college students, but what about the kids that don't go to college? Like, not everybody goes to college and can be as educated, or they don't choose the fields that will have them take, classes in sociology and history and stuff like that. So, it needs to be done earlier than college because everybody doesn't go to college. But I was one of those people that I literally thought, like, segregation was olden days. And the first desegregation lawsuit was 10 minutes from my house, the Mendez versus Westminster case. I had no idea that it set the precedent for Brown. And I lived right there. Like, even in the 1980s, people were not teaching history the way that, real history.
I just wanted to comment that because a lot of times in our conversations, because of this lack of word power, we kind of might lump, folks into that, well, the conservatives or the right. And I've learned over time that because of the subtleness of bias and unconscious bias, especially, and privilege, that there are many people who believe that their intentions are correct. They believe that they're right because they just don't see the other side. I say with Black people have an opportunity to see both sides because we were raised in a white history, but we know the other side of not only history, our present also. We understand oppression from a firsthand experience, although being raised in a white system. Whereas white people don't understand the African-American aspects. So the thought process is normally just from a white standpoint. And when they make these decisions, or they think they got it right, the school board guy thinks he's got it right or whatever, it could be just because I couldn't say what I was getting ready to say something, but I'm not gonna say that. It could be just because he just has not realized or embraced the fact that as a white person, maybe he really doesn't understand the Black issue.
So what I've seen from some of the folks who probably have just heard the sound bites, don't actually know that it's a theory that was created, I think it was in the 60s, and it's taught at law school. They just think that critical race theory is being critical of white people and anti-white. So I think that is what a lot of them have in their mind. I'm sure that's what some of the outlets are saying about it, but it doesn't seem to make sense to me. If you want to be united, and we're just talking about racism here, we're not even talking about CRT, why can we not just go through our history as it actually happened, learn from it, you know, accept the wrongs that were done from, you know, the Native Americans, from slavery, from the way we treated the Japanese people. You know, we could be here forever talking about all the stuff the United States has done in its existence.
Yeah.
But
Not too long ago,
yeah,
like today.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
guess why is that something that goes over their heads, that if we just, you know, come together and analyze what has happened and then, you know, move forward from it, everyone understanding, you know, what went wrong in the past, taking accountability. I guess if your goal is to be united, like, why are we hiding things?
It's unfortunate that so many people just flat out believe what they've been taught.
Mhm.
Well, it's in, if this was in my history book every year, George Washington discovered America. Well, how are you going to discover a continent where it's people already there?
Mhm.
George Washington brought whiteness to America. He didn't discover it. And this, you know, and folks have been raised since kindergarten or preschool to believe these lies. And so now to move further, they have to be deprogrammed, which is a very difficult process, and then reprogrammed. Of course, right here in the South, in South Carolina, we've got people who still believe in the war of Northern aggression, who still believe that the South won the war, and they're still flying the flag and everything. But they lost. How do you overcome that level of cognitive dissonance? They lost. Right here in Charleston, no matter what ethnicity, you don't find a lot of people who know that this was the disembarkation point for Africans who were brought to the mainland from Sullivan's Island, who walked. I was here maybe 15 years before I found out that where the new aquarium is right now is the site of Gadsden's Wharf, where it's believed, I believe 60 to 65% of America's slave trade first set their foot on American shore, on the mainland. And I walked those grounds for a long time. As a matter of fact, it used to be a project there. They actually, they put everybody out of the project. They said the ground was contaminated, toxic. They put everybody out. Now they got soccer fields and condos there. It's really nice. So, you know, this is an ongoing thing. How do you change that? Our tourism industry, which is our number one industry here, 90% or 95% of the tours that you take give a whitewashed history. You're not going to hear about slavery, about slave trade, about slave uprisings, about gentrification. You're not going to hear any of that on these nice sweet tea tours. You know, they're great. You pay your money and you leave with it. Come with a smile and leave with a smile. But will they tell you the truth? Nope. So until we get to that point where we're just ready to accept the truth all around, where we get educators who are not afraid to say, we're going to rewrite the books, until we get politicians who are ready to tell our educators, no, you're going to rewrite the books and make them tell the truth, then we're going to continue to have this problem, because it's a mental thing. It's a mental thing. Folks have got to be deprogrammed from that supremacist attitude and unconscious bias, and then reprogrammed with equity and truth and real love, because that other way, that's not real love. It's not real love.
Right. Stephanie, what do you think is the way to go with the school system? What do you think is in store for, you know, K through 12? I know you're teaching college age kids, but I guess, what do you think this means for K through 12? You know, some of the stuff, they're not learning accurate history as it is, but what do you think this is going to change anything? Or what do you think about, you know, about what
I
they
honestly don't think it will change anything because I don't think any of the high school teachers are saying what I'm teaching is critical race theory. Like, that's not what they're saying. They're required to use a book and they're using the book. You know, it's already being whitewashed. It's not going to change all that much. I'm not afraid that students in high school are going to be learning less because they're already not learning very much.
right.
You know, when they come to me, thankfully, most of my students are very open to learning about things they didn't understand before. But the people I'm worried about are the people that don't go to college. Because I don't think they're learning critical race theory or anything substantive as it is, especially not in South Carolina. So if they're already not learning what they should, how much more can you not learn, right? I think it might have the opposite. It could have the opposite effect where teachers might say, let me see about this. And they might look into it and decide ways that they can give students a more accurate education, or at least that's my hope. Probably not going to happen, but I like to think positive.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally hear that. And, you know, if it's any sort of consolation, I went to high school in Pennsylvania and I don't think my education was fantastic. I did not learn tons of things that I've learned, you know, since. And I feel like we didn't talk about anything that, you know, the United States participated in that was something we would be, you know, thinking critically about. I never learned about Tulsa. I was just in Wilmington last weekend and there was a Wilmington massacre and I just learned about that from seeing those little signs on the sidewalk. So yeah, you know, South Carolina definitely has specific issues, but Pennsylvania was not teaching any of this stuff either. Nothing that I can recall. I've been very, you know, surprised since being out of high school what I have learned through college classes or even just on social media. And I think that social media might be the biggest way to educate the folks who don't go to college or don't finish college. If they are open, obviously, you know, you have to have an open mind. And if their mind is shut, then I'm not sure what we're going to do. These folks are going to maybe become parents and then they will be the next, you know, the next parents of the school age kids that are outraged over teaching about race. So it just seems to be a repeating cycle. If there's any, you know, anything that either of you think that we can do to just educate the general public other than, you know, talks like these, I'm all ears because my daughter's going to school here in Orange County in the fall for public school for the first time, and I'm honestly terrified of it. And I know that I'm going to have to be teaching her so much at home because she's not going to be getting the education that she needs in school.
You know, I grew up in Chicago and we had the same educational system, taught us all the same things, you know, with liberty and justice for all. You know, all men are created equal and endowed with certain, we learned all of that, the same thing. We didn't learn in Chicago, we didn't learn Black history. We didn't learn about, I lived in a project that was named for Ida B. Wells, and we didn't learn about Ida B. Wells in school or in the projects living there. So that's not an uncommon occurrence. But I think that the remedy for this, first off, is long-term. It's a couple of things. One thing we need to do is drop this title, critical race theory. We need to just throw that out and say truth. We need to teach the truth. But, and I know, Stephanie, that you're at collegiate level, but we need to start this educational process in the truth at the same age where we start educating our children about history. They get history in kindergarten and in first grade. And we need to be teaching them the truth of history from that age on. And again, drop that with liberty and justice for all part of that pledge too. Let's stop doing that until we get it right. We can just take a break from that part of the pledge and then add it back in at a later date when we get it right, that for all part of it. But I think, the earlier we catch our children and we give them the tools it takes to be successful, to be loving, to be a part of our society, the more, while they're still moldable. Because once they get older, now we got to break through everything they've learned. We got to break into there.
Mhm.
We need to start them off on those levels. Another thing, and this is aside from this, the racial aspect of the educational system, is the fact that in African American communities and in white communities and our other communities, Native American, Latino, and Asian, we need to be from a very young age also teaching conflict resolution. That way, we can't start in high school trying to teach a child conflict resolution. They've already decided how they're going to handle conflicts. But if we start at second grade, third grade, we can change that mindset. The same thing with the truth of history. We can change the mindset so it won't be as hard to break through that shell that they develop over time. Of course, there's a lot that's going to come from home, but at least they'll be able to have the two sides available to pick and choose from where they want to believe at. If we don't ever give them the truth, then all they're going to have to believe is the lie. And that's where we're at right now. That's the condition that we're at right now, a condition that harbors white supremacy, white nationalism. And let me flip the coin, because a lot of times within Black communities, because we don't have the alternate all the time, and there's anger over what we have been given, now you have Black racism. I said it. I said it. Or at least bias against white people.
Mhm.
And we have to break that too. We have to break that too. We're one society, we're one people, we're one mankind, or humankind. And until we can live together, work together, and love together like that, then, call me utopian. It is what it is.
Yeah. Stephanie, what do you think? Where do we start? Obviously, we probably start with our children, but any other thoughts on where we would start?
Well, and then I we need to try to elect people that believe in equality rather than have people that want to divide and separate us. But, there are lots of studies, numerous studies that have been done that show that if people work together for a common goal on an equal playing field, then they won't have these hostilities or these racist attitudes or prejudices or whatever. Right now, we still have such high level of segregation that it's really hard to get kids that are different, that are Chinese and Japanese and Thai and Black and white and Cuban or whatever, getting them all together in the same room and working towards a common goal. It's more than somebody saying, oh, I have a white friend, right? It's having attitudes where you believe that everybody is equal, and it does start in young. Like a lot of times when kids go to school, that's the first time seeing anybody different from themselves because of the segregation in our neighborhoods. And so, when you put kids together and they're working together, they will carry that with them and be more open in the future. But right now, it's difficult to do because of the way that this whole thing about critical race theory is the social structure, creates these divides, and we have to change it from a very deep level. It's not even just a matter of teaching kids different, but it's changing the criminal justice system, changing the housing market, right? Changing, policing, changing the education system. Like, this is not something that can be done in a day or a year or a very short time. There's a lot of institutional change that needs to happen for people to literally be on an equal playing field and feel like they are.
I feel like the term being used and tossed around is just, the latest way for folks to have an excuse to be racist, saying that they're against critical race theory. They just don't want to say, well, actually, I'm racist and I don't want to talk about that. Interesting.
They gonna say that.
Courtney, your son brought up in the comments, right-wingers sometimes bring up the 1994 crime bill, and so they call, Biden racist, yet they refuse to acknowledge racism built into the system. And he was just like, make it make sense. So
There's my son for you. I'm teaching him right.
yes, he's fantastic. So that is true. They'll acknowledge racism sometimes and then not
Selective.
other times.
Selective racism.
Mm-hmm.
When it's convenient for them.
Right.
But the reality is, and Stephanie, you hit on it as far as elections. When we look at the educational disparities of communities of color, that leads toward a less than mediocre lifestyle because of lack of opportunity. How even programs within the school system that would benefit those who are not going to college have been taken out of the school system in order to keep them relegated to the lowest wage jobs possible, and to keep the lowest wage or lower if they can. Add into it healthcare disparities, a lack of healthcare opportunities in urban communities. Add into it food deserts. Add into it guns, drugs, gangs, all of these things, lack of investment in those communities. And for those same racists, well, I guess I shouldn't. Yes, I should. For those same racists to not look at the holistic picture, redlining, gentrification, the catchword of accessible house or affordable housing, excuse me, which is the craziest thing I've ever heard. I never used the term affordable housing, because what's affordable for somebody that makes $400,000 a year is not affordable for somebody that makes $40,000 a year, and surely not enough for somebody that makes $20,000 a year. So they choose to overlook those facts in order to support themselves. They can go to this one little topic and that one little topic, and they stay right there because they will have to embrace the truth if they look holistically at the situation, and they don't want to see that truth. They do not want to see that truth. So there's a whole lot of, the pandemic brought the truth out. If there was anything about this pandemic that was in any way good, it brought the truth out. The politicians realized we need to pump more money into the bottom levels in order to strengthen the economy. Well, we've been telling you that for a long time when we were talking about $15 an hour. Now you get it, huh? And watch, they go, as soon as we're out of this, they're going to go right back to that default setting. They don't, the $15, we're giving them money. They're already they're talking about it with unemployment. We're giving them money. No, they'll take away Social Security and everything else because they're not impacted by that. So it's crazy how they pick and choose their issues according to how those issues support what they want the world to believe, and then overlook everything else that might change their minds and change their hearts about how they treat people. So changing them,
Mm-hmm.
Yes, let's change some politicians.
Absolutely. I think that's a key point. And it starts, with your school board. Jelena told me that she doesn't think that it is possible to block a philosophical theory from being taught. So I know that Missouri is apparently trying to ban it. I don't know the details of their bill or like what they're targeting, but I was doing some reading earlier today, and they're apparently trying to get it out of their public school system. And I'm still just thinking, like, it probably isn't in your public school system unless we're just redefining the term, and changing the definition for critical race theory here. You know, it's just mind-boggling that this is the latest thing that we've been caught up on. And it feels like a distraction instead of talking about all the different issues that both of you have brought up with housing, with healthcare, with, you know, wealth inequality, everything else that we could go on and on about that affects people of color and specifically Black people differently than it affects white people. I just feel like now we are being shoved something else in our face, and this is what the media is trying to spin. I'm going to kind of harp on the local media a little bit. They brought this up. They also didn't bother to include what CRT even is. So nowhere in their articles or in their posts have they defined it. They talked to Jelena for like a brief, you know, minute or two and had a 30-second soundbite from her, which she's always fantastic, but of course they didn't include everything. And then they, you know, spend their time on social media asking if it should be taught. And it just, if you just don't go in the comment sections of your local news stations, because it is a nightmare. And I'm just like, no, is this ethical? Like, is this okay? Like for journalists to do, like, not entirely sure if this is something that they should be participating in when it feels like all that's happening is the local people who may or may not be racist are getting all riled up about the idea. So I agree that replacing politicians with better politicians who are able to see the truth and want to bring us forward is key. I'm curious, Stephanie, about like when you get the students in college and you're teaching them your different sociology classes, you said like a lot of them have never heard of, you know, any of the things that you're talking about. Like what level, where's their knowledge at for any of it?
All the way back to thinking that the Native Americans and Pilgrims were friends, you know, in kindergarten, they're making the hand turkey and having a party where some people dress up as Native Americans and some dress up as Pilgrims. And from then on, like, because I have to teach half the semester is history before I can even get to what's going on now. So from then on, you know, they're like, oh, wow, and that, and that. And I have students come up to me and say, you know, I looked up what you said and you were right. And I'm like, yeah, I know I was right. But a lot of times they're so surprised that they have to go find out information. But I try not to use regular textbooks because even at the college level, they don't cover all that they should. So, you know, I've had to educate myself quite a bit. And also I tend to, you know, I've taught at two different universities in South Carolina, I taught in North Carolina, and I try to kind of contextualize to where I'm at. But also bringing in like, hey guys, it's okay, because when I was in high school, I didn't know that this big desegregation case was happening 15 minutes away from me, or had happened. I wasn't born yet, but right before I was born in my father's lifetime, like I have to personalize it, you know, and I have to work really hard to personalize it because we need students that are open to information. If you start, you know, giving them too much without saying, hey, I'm on your side, I didn't know either, but now I do, and now I can do better, you can too, they tend to want to do better, want to do more, want to inform other people.
Yeah.
So I really just think education is the key, whether they're in college or not. You know, the more people that know the real history, they're talking to people, right? They're voting, they're talking to their children. So I'm hoping this social media thing, which I don't really like all that much, I hope it'll do some good in that context.
Yeah. Lorraine is suggesting that maybe we should mandate that all students take Black history written by those who know Black history. I'm not sure how we would get that through in our current system. But
I think that's a bigger fight, really, or at least an equivalent fight as just trying to get it into the curriculum.
Yeah.
And, you know, historically for me, coming from Chicago, and these are just things that I think back on. You know, I went to a Catholic seminary for high school, my high school years. And it was about 97, 98% white. And of course, I hate to say this, but of course, the athletes in the school were predominantly the black folk, the brothers. It was all male, the brothers. But the school name, they were the Quigley South Rebels. And the banner was the Confederate flag in Chicago. This was 1966, 2 years before Dr. King was assassinated. Right after, I went to school 4 miles away from where he was marching and got hit in the head with a brick in Chicago. So here we were under this Confederate flag representing this school. And we said, no, that's not gonna work. That's not working for us, because that was definitely a Klan symbol in our eyesight. We didn't know much about Black history. Of course, that was in a transitional period, but we had to fight. It took us 2 years to get the name changed to the Spartans, Quigley South Spartans. And this is a Catholic seminary. To think that they would actually have some compassion or something like that. They didn't care. We the rebels, and that you should understand about that Confederate flag. No, we said you should understand about that Confederate flag. So they did remove it. But then my senior year, we almost got expelled from school. There were 9 of us as seniors. And 1969, December 4th, I remember it well. That was the same day that Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were assassinated. And we walked out of school because we went to the west side where the brothers was. We walked out of school and they were going to put us out of school. We weren't going to be allowed to graduate had it not been for the African-American Catholic priests coming to our rescue and saying, no, you don't understand why they did that. We do. They did what they needed to do. But the white establishment didn't get it. They didn't get it. Had it not been for them, I wouldn't have graduated that next May. And that was 50 years ago. But that's just some of it. I mean, you know, to not know that 10 out of our first 12 presidents were slave owners, that's just something simple to be taught that the wall in Wall Street was called that because that's where they sold slaves at. We should have the truth just put out there, but it's a fight. It's definitely a fight because of the ingrained nature of white supremacy. We don't want those Black children to have that level of pride, because you got to keep a working class. You got to make sure that you got people that'll work for free by going to prison. We got to have ways to kill them off, keep them in those neighborhoods and out of our neighborhoods. And I hate to put it that way, but it is what it is, to use a miscreant's phrase that is no longer in office.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like to talk about this, what they're trying to prevent is us from tackling all of the systemic issues that are affecting the Black population today, that, you know, also affect the other brown communities and some poor folk in different ethnicities. But the criminal justice system that needs to be totally revamped, you know, the whole police issue with police brutality, the education disparities, everything with housing, all of these things that they have racism embedded into them. I feel like it is just a way to, let's just push this to the side and ignore it. We don't want to fix this. We don't want you guys to work on fixing this. So we're just gonna outright ban talking about anything to do with race. And that's interesting, though, that you brought up in Chicago that the school had the Confederate flag as their symbol. The movie about Fred Hampton, Judas and the Black Messiah. Have either of you watched it? Okay, Stephanie, you should definitely watch it. It was good. the two actors, they did a phenomenal job. But when I was surprised to see that there was some, I don't know what they were, like the young progressive group that Fred was going around and trying to bring together his coalition, that they had a Confederate flag hanging up. And I'm thinking, these people are not, what? Like, how is this your heritage? What are you talking about? That was very shocking. And to hear that that was the flag that your school used was
Yeah.
Chicago. I mean, there were people in Western Pennsylvania who had it flying around, but we did not have any sort of, official anything that had the Confederate flag on it. That is just outrageous. And what was the reasoning for using it in Chicago? Did they ever say?
They never really said. They, when I started school there, it was in '66. The school had just opened 3 years prior, and they were the Quigley South Rebels. I don't get it, but that when we look at the nature of racism and the impact it has on the oppressed, not only were we trying to be successful in school, we also had to deal with this mental thing too. And that's after traveling from the projects, which is a whole different lifestyle, to this white community where we were going to school at for most of the year. So we had two separate lives. And even in the projects, going to that type of a school, you wasn't exactly accepted all the time. But then to get to school, and the majority of the acquaintances that we met during that 4-year period, the majority were latent racists, and the faculty. Learned more about them, and especially in recent years. I've been in contact with someone. We had supposed to have our 50th anniversary last year, reunion anniversary last year, but we didn't do that. And I've had a chance to see some of their comments, those comment sections. Well, those comment sections that'll reveal them in a heartbeat. The truth comes out. And I've seen them on some of those their posts and making comments, and I'm like, Lord, 50 years later, you still ain't learned, huh? Still didn't learn. Still didn't learn the pain that you inflicted on other people in your own school and high school.
Yeah.
It was challenging. It was definitely challenging.
Yeah.
But I don't understand why they had that darn flag there.
No. And that's the thing. Like I think a lot of people, and myself included, before moving to the South, they think that the South is like this extra racist area. And now that I have lived in 3 different states at this point, 2 of them being in the North, I can say that's not true. There is definitely the same amount of racism in upstate New York and in southwestern Pennsylvania that I have witnessed, as a person just like watching here in South Carolina. They may not have the Confederate flag flying in upstate New York or in western Pennsylvania. Some of them do, but most of them, no, they're still racist everywhere, and it is permeating our society. So I think that's part of the larger conversation that, we get to talk about now that critical race theory is being pushed in everyone's faces. And I think that we have to not let the narrative say that critical race theory is, indoctrinating children into like communist beliefs and that it's anti-white. If you think it's anti-white, then maybe you're feeling a little bit guilty for things that have happened in the past. That is just my opinion on it. And so I am really glad that both of you decided to come talk to me and talk about, your experiences and what you think about this topic. And before we go, I just want to see if you have anything else that you would like to say that you didn't get to say around, maybe your work or this topic of eradicating racism from our society and from our culture. And and then I'll do a little bit of wrap up and then we're done. But thank you very much. And Stephanie, you have anything else you would like to share with us? Put you on the spot.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. What about you, Pastor Dixon?
Well, I want to give a shout out to my good friend Faden Santana. Some of you all might recognize Faden. He was the young man that shot the Walter Scott video and who courageously stood up against the system that was trying to intimidate him. They were threatening him. And these were law enforcement officers and the white community that did not want the officer that murdered Walter Scott to go to prison or even to go to court. But he stood up, and just this past week, he fled to Santo Domingo, where he's from, and then he returned back to North Charleston. Since then, he's gotten his citizenship, and he's recently, just last week, opened up a barbershop beauty salon. This thing is huge. It has like 8 chairs for women and about 8 chairs for men. It's got another area though. The tagline on the floor, it says diversity, unity, love, because it's not only a barber shop, it's actually a place that he wants it to be a cultural meeting place where people of different ethnicities can come in and sit down and talk about the hard topics, talk about the differences and embrace those differences as being real, not the way those who are against critical race theory being taught. They want you to believe one side of the story and not accept the fact that there's another real and present story that's true. And Faden has opened up that shop ready to build bridges in a city that is extremely divided here in North Charleston, and racially divided in North Charleston, economically divided, and every other kind of divided you can think of. But he came back to the place where they ran him away for a minute for protection of his wife and his child. He came back in order to make a difference. And I have no doubt in my mind that the concept that he's brought to the table is going to be successful, because I'm going to be sitting right in there listening and talking with everybody else, and all are welcome. He's invited law enforcement in. He's invited business people in. Whoever wants to come in and sit down and talk, leave your title at the door and just come as you are and have honest conversation, respecting what each other say and understanding that we can agree to disagree with each other without being disagreeable. So I had to give him a plug. Thank you for that opportunity. That was a shameless plug. But he represents that spirit that I believe that is the foundation of our nation. Let's take all the catchphrases out. Liberty and justice for all men were created. Let's take all of that out and just get down to the spirit that it was created on and live up to that spirit. And then we would definitely, as a nation, embrace critical race theory and the teaching of it from K4 right on up through college.
Thank you both so much. This has been one of a few conversations that we're going to have on critical race theory. The next one is probably going to be maybe July 1st, somewhere around there. And we have a professor from Francis Marion joining us, professor from Coker College, not Mel Hyman. Mel Hyman recommended this man. You will get to see Mel Hyman again, just not that day. And then potentially someone who focuses on K through 12, specifically out of Colorado. And I am hoping to bring on a student from CCU who does a lot with the inclusivity and the race organization. I'm like forgetting the name, Stephanie, you might know, like diversity and inclusion or something at CCU. I'm not sure, but we are going to make sure that we have different perspectives, and I think having students is key. So seeing, what they have learned and not learned, and what they think. If you're someone who is graduating or just graduated from high school and you want to come talk to us, like shoot me a message and let's talk about it. But once again, this is Grandster in Action Together, and we are signing off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashlyn.
Bye.